So welcome to a beautiful overcast day here in the Netherlands. Yes, I'm back in the Netherlands. I'm definitely not through all my Sweden material. I think I have about 3, maybe 4 videos left, but I'm getting a lot of questions about the images that I took in Sweden, and especially about the high-res images or bracketed images. Did I use it on this image? Did I use it on that image? And I want to explain to you a little bit why I make certain choices, why I make high-res images, why I make bracketed images, and why I just take normal exposures of one single shot. That's what I wanted to explain to you in this little video, and then next week or this Sunday we're going to continue with the Sweden series. I was hoping for a beautiful sunrise, do a little bit of both, but as it is looking now, we are looking at an overcast day, so I don't think there's any sunrise gonna happen, and yeah, which makes it quite difficult here in the Netherlands to find a shot. This is about it, what I'm experiencing the whole winter here. Temperatures that feel like it's spring, about 10 degrees, overcast, rain, no colors, gray. So yeah, definitely difficult conditions as a landscape photographer. So I was really happy that I had the opportunity to go to Sweden. So you can hear there are a lot of geese around here. So I hope they are not disturbing the video too much. But yeah, first let's start on why what the difference is between a high-res image and a bracketed image, and of course a normal image. So first of all, let's start with a single image. Why and when, why do I take that? And how do I take it? Well, first of all, I always look at the histogram on the back of my camera. In my case, the System OM-1. And, but this is probably the same for any modern camera. They all have histograms on the back of the camera, especially when they're mirrorless. The only thing that I look for is if all the information considering an image is in that histogram, if it's not too dark or if it's not too bright. If it's too bright, I try to compensate it with a different shutter speed, or when I'm shooting in the aperture priority, like I do a lot in my landscape photography, I just use the image exposure compensation. So that's the front dial here on my camera, so right here, and I just turn it a little bit to the darker side or a little bit to the brighter side to get all the information in that histogram. I know that when I start editing these raw files, there's a loudy one coming over at the moment, but when everything is in that histogram, it actually gives me the opportunity in Lightroom to pull up the shadows and to reduce those highlights to get one good image. And I know that when all the information is in that histogram is correct, I can do that with all the blacks and all the highlights in an image. So that's when I use a single exposure image. So let's now look at the bracketed images. When do I start to use a bracketed image? So now let's look at why I start to use bracketing images. Well, bracketing is actually compensating exposures, or taking multiple exposures that you can adjust into Lightroom at the end when you've finished, or adjust, you can put those together to get one single file. And why would you use bracketing? In this case, as you can see, it's an overcast morning, not much going on in dynamic range. You know, you can get everything into one specific shot, but there are light conditions where that's going to be quite challenging. For example, if there wouldn't have been any clouds here, the sunrise would have been straight in front of me. And when I want to take an image, of course you can use filters, but if you watch this channel regular, you will know that I'm not a big fan of graduated filters. So what I usually do, I start to bracket images. So in my case, like I said, I often shoot in the aperture priority mode, and I use my front dial to compensate exposures. When I'm shooting towards the sun, you get a very bright sky and a very dark foreground. And what you want in this specific case, if you take one shot, you just can't get all the information into one shot. So you have a histogram, or it's completely to the black side or it's completely to the bright side, but it's difficult to get all that information in. And like I said, you can use a graduated filter, but I'm not a big fan of those, so I use the bracketing mode. So what I do, I always start to aim the exposure for the brightest part of the image, and when I've set that in, focused everything, I just take maybe, and I can't say how much it is. It can be 3 shots, it can be 5 shots, but it can be as high as, I think I've done 20 shots into one scene. So what I always do, I just dial back the front wheel here 2 stops. For example, I start with a normal exposure at 0 on the back. So let me show you here. I can see it down here. The exposure compensation is now in balance, so it's in 0. But what I start to do, I just give it 2 clicks with the dial going to 0.7. Take another shot. Do another 2 stops to 1.3 beneath 0. Another exposure. 2 stops down. Another exposure. 2 stops down. Another exposure. So that's how I do it. Manually, and of course you can do it in your menu. You can go into your menu. It's different with every camera, and you can choose how many shots you want to bracket, where you want to start. If you want to go down, and you just push the shutter once and the camera goes, and you have 5, 10, 15, just the amount of frames that you've set in your camera. Why I don't prefer that is I often forget to put those settings back. So when I'm walking around, I want to take a shot and then I'm still in the bracketing mode. And I'm just so used to doing it like this, you know, using the front dial to compensate these images. And it just works really nice for me. So it depends, you can choose for yourself if you want to do it automatically or manually. There are all kinds of ways, just choose the one that suits the way you like to photograph. So that's one advice. If you start to use bracketing, before doing a frame, put your hand before the first frame, then take your shots, 5, 10, 15, just how much you need, and put your hand in front of the camera again after the last shot. That way you know in Lightroom which shots belong to which series of bracketings. If you don't do that, it's just really difficult to find out. There are certain tools in Lightroom that can help you to stack those images and to find the right images, but it's just really difficult. So if you do that, you just know these images belong together. This is one set of images, makes it life much easier. So when do I stop with the bracketing? You know, what is the lowest or the darkest exposure that I take? It's actually very simple. I always continue until I shoot one dark frame, you know, when there's no light in the frame anymore. Because if I have that frame, I know that I have all the information that I need from the black side to the bright side. And that's the point where I'm stopping. And that's why I always use a tripod when I start to bracket images, because you can do it handheld. It's very difficult to keep it steady when you're taking 10, 15 shots. So I have maybe 10, 15 shots from very bright to pitch black, and I just stack those together in Lightroom, and I will show it when we get back home. I will show you the process on how I do that. It's actually very simple. So the camera just stacks those files together, or Lightroom in that case, and it's all done. So now let's look at the high-res mode. What actually happens when you push the high-res mode? On my OM-1 Mark II here, there is this button on top here. This is the red button. If I push that once, I get a little icon that I'm in the high-res shooting mode. And I can actually adjust it if I push the red button and hold it. And after that, just turn on the back dial here. I can change the settings from high-res mode on the tripod or high-res mode handheld. And there is a big difference in that mode, because a handheld mode creates 50 megapixel images, and the tripod mode on this camera creates 80 megapixel images. And it depends, in one mode it shoots a little bit more images than in the other one. So what actually happens is when you push the shutter in a high-res situation, the image sensor starts to shift a little from top to bottom, left to right. And it takes a shot in every position. So what it actually does, it makes your file much bigger. And another advantage of it is that you have a sick dynamic range into one specific image. And I know if you're a full frame shooter, you will say, I don't need more dynamic range. Well, I don't either, but in some cases it's pretty handy to have those extra dynamic range images. Or if you're at a scene and you're thinking, wow, this is a phenomenal scene, I want this to be able to print it as large as I want, I always press that high-res shutter and take the shot. But I always take a single exposure also. So it's not that I do one or the other. I always take both just to be sure that I have the file that I need for that specific situation. So and with those high-res shots, what happens is, like I told you, every time the sensor changes its position, the camera takes a different shot. And when it's done, it stacks all those shots together in camera and creates one enormous raw file. In my case, it's a raw file. I know there are a couple of camera brands that create JPEGs, but with the OM system, it's a raw file. So when you know that, there is a huge advantage, of course, but there's also a disadvantage to this, because you can imagine if that sensor starts to shift position, it all of course happens really fast and depends on the shutter speed that you've dialed in. But if you're having challenging conditions, like for example wind or snow or rain or whatever, or a changing scene, a moving subject like an animal, you won't be able to use the high-res mode. Because between every frame, no matter how fast they go, there is a slight possibility that the image is changing. You know, leaves can be blown over, birds can fly away, humans can walk further. So that's definitely a real challenge for the camera. And like for example wind and leaves, the algorithms get better and better on camera. So for example, when high-res was introduced, I think the first time that I started to use it was on the OM-1X. Compared to this OM-1 Mark II, the algorithms got much better. So it just feels like that the camera is now knows about those leaves moving, and it tries to put them in the same specific position. But still, you just can't rely on that. You know, if the wind is too much, you don't know that algorithm. So there's no freedom to choose which frame you want to use with a high-res shot. You just get one frame and that's it. And you just have to hope that the camera did his work good. And I know that in a still situation, without any wind, without moving objects, it does a phenomenal job. And I often take these shots. But if there's wind or rain or snow or whatever, you can't use the high-res mode. So in that case, I go to bracketing mode if I can do it in one single shot. So with bracketing, you just get, like I said, 10 to 15 different raw files. And for example, if some leaves are being blown over or an animal has moved in time between those shots, you can always say, hey, I'm gonna leave away the first 5 and the last 5 where that movement is too much, and I'm gonna concentrate on those 3, 4, 5 files, giving me more space. Or in worst case scenario, you can choose one file from the series and use only that specific shot, because that's it, in the exact range of dynamic range where you can do the most of it in post-processing. So that is the situation when I start to bracket my shots. So in Sweden, I took a phenomenal shot of a house on an island, and a lot of questions came if that was a high-res shot, because the house was red and all of the rest of the image was black and white. Well, no, it wasn't. If you understand what I just said, you will know that with the heavy snow coming down at that moment, there was just no possibility for me to shoot a high-res shot or even a bracket, because every shot those snowdrops would have been in different positions, and it would have created chaos in the image. So I could only take one single exposure on that shot, and it had to be the perfect settings. But the dynamic range on that specific situation wasn't that high because everything was white. So I didn't need to bracket or high res or whatever. One shot was enough as long as I got the right exposure for that shot. So can you see it? There is a little bit of light appearing in those clouds here, but where the sun is rising there's absolutely nothing. There's no hole in the clouds or anything. So don't know where that's coming from, but it's not going to be any better for photography, unfortunately. So I will keep my eye out here in case something changes, but I'm afraid it's not going to change it. And of course there is another advantage, or there are tricks you can do with high-res shots or bracketed shots. For example, you can use the high-res mode to create movement in the water if you like that silky look. When the water flows by and you're taking multiple shots which the camera blends, you get a sort of a long exposure feeling to an image. So if you forgot your filters and you're not having an OM system, because I have a live ND filter in the camera, but if you don't have that opportunity, then you can just take a high-res shot or a bracket shot and stack those shots together, and Lightroom or the camera will create some sort of smooth line in the image. So that's a good way to use it. What I also did, and in this case you need a really fast computer to edit those images, is if the dynamic range of a scene is absolutely sick, you can, and that's pretty difficult, you can do a bracket of high-res images. And there are a couple of shots where I did that in the past, and it created sick frames, absolutely sick frames. But what I just did is turn the compensation down like I do in a normal bracket, but with every shot I'm pushing the high-res button. So in the end I end up with 5 to 10 shots of high-res raw files, and all those high-res raw files, they are in this case on a tripod, I think they are 8 stacked images together. So in the end, if you take 10 brackets like that, you get 80 images and an insane large raw file in the end if you do it. And I did it a couple of times, especially with panoramas. I sometimes do it. I actually did one in Sweden recently, which was in last Sunday's video, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it was the one with the yellow house. I won't show it after this, but yeah, it's just in those situations with no wind, no moving objects, you can do that, but it's absolutely impossible with moving objects in your frame. So to answer that first question, if I use high-res images or if I use bracket images or single shot exposures, yes, I do use it. I use them all. Do I use it all the time? No, definitely not. All these options have very specific situations where I need it in. And like I said, if there's no wind or anything, I can shoot a high-res image if the dynamic range is too much for a single exposure. If conditions get challenging with wind, rain, snow, moving objects, I always choose to bracket my scenes and always use a tripod. So that's why I also carry around a tripod, which isn't even necessary anymore with the image stabilization in the cameras these days. But it gives me those opportunities, like creating bracketing images to finalize my scenes. But in those challenging conditions, I start to bracket images. And if situations get even too challenging, like the shot I showed you in Sweden of the little island, there's just not an opportunity. You just have to nail that one single exposure. And sometimes it just isn't possible. And that's realism in photography. You can't take every shot, and that is unfortunate. But there's always a tomorrow, there's always a next day, but we have so many opportunities or so many technical advantages these days to yeah, how do you say that? To help us with those shots, that those occasions where I can't take the shot that I'm seeing, maybe that's 0.1% of all the images that I take in a year. It maybe happens once during a whole year. So yeah, there's definitely nothing to worry about, because we have all these technologies to help us with those images. So this is why I use the high-res mode and the bracket mode, and or the single mode, and I hope you've liked the shots that I've showed you, and I hope you have an idea on when I use it or why I use it. So let's get back to my house and I will show you on the computer how I process a bracketed image. It's actually very simple, but it's a little step that you have to see in Lightroom. So let's get back home and I will show you in Lightroom how I process those images. So we're back at my home, and let me show you how I process these bracketed images. So it's actually very simple, and you can see that I made one mistake here already that I just advised you to do. I didn't put a black frame in front of this sequence of bracketed images, and there's no black frame in the end. And what you can see is that it's difficult to see which images belong together, and in this particular shots you can see that there's a very bright frame of the last sequence and a dark frame of the next sequence. But in some cases the difference isn't that big. So in those cases I always prefer to when I have that black frame in front of it. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to select all these images from here to this one, because that's one sequence of images that I used for this bracket. So I've selected all of these files. What I do then is I right click one of these images, doesn't matter which one, and I say combine images to HDR. So you can also push the fast thing Ctrl H here to access this system. So it's going into the HDR mode at the moment. It always takes a while for Lightroom to process. I have a very fast laptop, but in some cases this can take several minutes. So it's just a matter of waiting here until all these files are loaded in your Lightroom. So this is it, all files are loaded. You can choose on this side now if you want Lightroom to cover for all the blackouts in the image. So in some cases you have an overlap, for example, of clouds, and you get these really strange shapes in the sky. I never think it's necessary, so I always have this on low. The automatic settings, I always turn it off down here. I don't need Lightroom to do it for me, and you can see here already that Lightroom does a pretty good job, but it's always better to do it yourself when you're adjusting the settings yourself. So I always turn these off, and then just combine on the bottom here and just wait. You can see on the top here how long it takes before the HDR is finished. Like I said, in my case it goes pretty fast, but in some cases it can take several minutes. So this is the raw file that was just created, or the DNG file in this case, but it still has all the information that you want to have in a file. So you can really, let's have a look here. I'll do a little quick edit here, turn down the highlights, pull up those shadows here in front, and little whites, little blacks. This is just a little basic setting here. So I'm not gonna do the whole image in this video. There are other videos on my channel where I show you how I edit my my images. So if you're interested in that, just have a look on the channel and you will see it. So this is a little quick edit, and I think I did a little bit to the sky here. I made that sky a lot more to the yellow side, which I think was the situation on that location, but due to those brackets you can't see it anymore. And this actually was my finished raw file that you can see right over here. If it's loading, it takes a while. But you can see already that I have a lot of masks in this image. So I actually don't think that this is the finished raw file. This is the finished raw file. So I went a little bit too crazy on the first one. So this is actually the one that I did, and you can see I have a couple of masks here on that for the sky, but I didn't do much more to this image. So all the information is in the image due to that stacking of the images. So you get from the darkest parts of your foreground to the brightest parts of the sky, and this is the shot. This is what it would have looked if you got a normal exposure. So if you put it on just 0, that the camera recommends that this is the right exposure. And this is what you get: a light sky and a dark foreground. In this case, the only solution was to bracket the file. And you can see that if I try to get information out of this image, if I put those settings in the same way, you will never get the information in those darks here in the foreground. So that's how I do it on the computer. So, and I guess that also answers the question to why I didn't take as many high-res shots or bracketed shots in Sweden. I just faced very challenging weather conditions there, with snowfall, with hard winds. There weren't many days where there was a possibility. And second of all, because the foreground was usually covered with snow, you didn't have the dynamic range that you would have here in the Netherlands during a sunrise. You know, this stuff is all going to be black during a sunrise, but in Sweden, when everything is white, there isn't much difference in dynamic range between the sky or your foreground. So there's no need to bracket those shots, and in the end I'm just very happy with the shots that I got from Sweden. A lot of them I'm really in love with. So this Sunday I'm gonna continue the trip to Sweden, and yeah, I think the last episodes are probably gonna be the best of the whole series. So it will definitely be worth to check those out. So if you didn't already, then please push the subscribe button underneath here, and you will see the more of the trip to Sweden. I hope you liked this video. If you did, then please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next video. So thanks for watching, and until Sunday, bye bye.